Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Shabbos Daf Pei Hey is devoted entirely to a discussion of Hilchos Kelayim. We will stay focused on the subject until the next Mishnah, which is just a few lines into Daf Pei Vav, so we'll get all the way to the Mishnah on Daf Pei Hey. Now, we had learned in the previous Mishnah that because of the halachos of Kelayim, it is forbidden to plant different types of vegetables too close to each other in such a manner that there will appear to be one patch of vegetables or one field that's mixed of various different species. So in order to be able to plant different species near each other, you need either of the following two conditions. Either they are spaced apart far enough that they do not share and draw nutrients from the same piece of land. Chazal said that the distance that a vegetable draws from is 1.5 tefachim away. Therefore, the plants have to be spaced 3 tefachim apart. So that's one way of having them near each other. The other way is that if the rows that they're in are clearly separate rows, and that would be if they are perpendicular to each other. So if you have 2 rows that are perpendicular to each other, even if they come right up to each other, that would be okay, because they're clearly separate rows, even though they share some ground. Now, the Gemara had said that it's possible to fit 5 different species into one 6 tefach by 6 tefach square of land. The Gemara here is going to discuss that primarily for the majority of the daf. The Gemara is going to ask, first of all, how do we know that the Rabbanan knew how far vegetables drew nutrients from? Second of all, where did they get that information from? Third of all, what exactly is the size and the shape of this 6 by 6 tefach path? Fourth, are you allowed to have other ones near it? And then we'll get into some other halachos relating to this, such as what happens if you add more into it, and how can one possibly maximize the land use to plant as many vegetables as he can and fill up as much of the space as he can within one field. So let's begin. First of all, the Gemara wants to know, you are telling me that you can fit 5 tefachim, 5 species into one 6 by 6 tefach patch of land. How do the Rabbanan know this? Who said that we can rely on Chachamim for this? Where did they get this information from? They were not farmers. So the Gemara says we have a pasuk that says, you shouldn't plant your trees and your vegetables up to your border because it's going to draw from your neighbor's land. And that is a halacha that Chazal had to understand how close you're allowed to go to the border. So you see, Chazal did know that you were allowed. They did know how far plants drew nutrients from, because that's how you have to fulfill that halacha. If the Torah tells us you can't plant your trees near other people's land, obviously it gave us the information as to how close you can go, because how much land will the trees draw from. Okay, now where did they actually get their information from? So the Gemara says, who are these Rishayim? It says, Asher Gavlu Rishayim, that the early people laid out how close you're allowed to get. So who are they? So the Gemara has a drasha here. It says in the pasuk describing the people who lived on Har Seir before Esav threw them out. It calls them HaChayri Yoshvei Haaretz, the Chayri who lived in the land. The Gemara says, what do you mean lived in the land? What did I think? They lived in the sky? Nobody lives in the sky. So Yoshvei Haaretz means that they knew how to understand the land, and they could tell you which square foot of land was suitable for planting grapes, which was suitable for planting olives, which was suitable for planting figs. How did they know that? So Gemara says, Chayri. Chayri is from the word reyach. They were able to smell the land, and that's how they were able to tell. Or chivi, elsewhere they're called chivi, which is like a chivia, like a snake. They actually tasted the dirt, and that's how they were able to tell what kind of land it was and what you should plant there. And the Gemara says that's how the Chachamim knew. They got their information in a Maseira from these people. That's how they understood about planting. Now the Gemara has another pshat. Just here what the word chayri means. The Gemara says it's like from the word of bnei chayrin, meaning free, that they became free of their land because Esav threw them out. Okay, so now we know that Chazal knew what they were talking about. Now the Gemara wants an exact description of how this 6 by 6 tefach square works. So the Gemara says, Rav Asi says, and he brings a brisa, you had to leave a frame around the 6 by 6. So the land itself that you planted had to be a full 6 tefachim by 6 tefachim in order to leave a 3 tefach space between the rows. Agav, the 3 tefach space included the stem, so it was from the center of each stem to the center of the other stem. That's why you're allowed to have 3 types in 6 tefachim, 1 on each end and 1 in the middle, and then you have 3 tefachim between all of them. Now, the frame that you left around the patch, how big was that? Gemara said it was 1 tefach wide. That way you could walk around to be able to work on it. How do you know that that was the size? Gemara brings a brisa. It's a Mishnah, actually. The brisa quotes Rabbi Huda, who quotes the pasuk about Eretz Yisrael. V'eshkiso b'ragelcha kegan hayarak. You water it on foot, like a vegetable field. Now, why? What does it mean on foot? That the frame around the patch should be wide enough for a foot. So it should be at least 1 foot wide. That's the width of a foot, not a 12-inch foot. And that measures as wide as a tefach. So you have to have a frame a tefach wide around it. Now, the Gemara says that's fine. We understand. The growing area has to be 6 tefachim by 6 tefachim. It has to have a path all the way around it that's 1 tefach wide. What about if you have a bunch of patches near each other? So each patch had a separate frame. So between the patches, you would have 2 tefachim. So Gemara has a machlokes whether or not you're allowed to put these patches near each other. So the Gemara, first of all, says that Rav said you can't. It has to be a patch that's by itself, alone, with nothing else in the field, because the neighboring patches, plants, the vegetables, will be too close to this patch's plants. They'll only be two tefachim away. So the Gemara says, why do you say that? Why don't you do as follows? Why don't you plant only half of the side of the patch, right? The way we had described, the way the patch works is that you have 5 species. You have 1 species on each of the 4 sides of the square, and then you have 1 in the center. So let the ones on the side not fill up the entire side of the square. Let it be less than half. And the one that's near it can also be less than half, but the other half. That way, they're not within 2 tefachim of each other. You could stretch it to much more than 2 tefachim if they're each doing less than half and the opposite half. So where it says, no, because Rav is understanding that the Mishnah, which described that you can fit 5 species into 1 patch, was referring to where you filled up the whole side. So the Gemara says, well, that doesn't make sense. Why did he say that it's referring to where you filled up the whole side? Better yet, let him say you didn't fill up the whole side, and he doesn't have to say that it's 1 patch that's all alone. Like this, you could have a few together. That makes much more sense. So the Gemara says, no, because Rav held that you can't do that. Rav held that even if you plan on planting only half the thing, we don't let you. Half the side, we do not allow you to, because we're afraid that you're going to end up planting the entire side of both neighboring patches, and what's going to end up happening is that they're going to be too close to each other, and it'll be usher because of kelayim. Therefore, he said the only way you're allowed to do this, is to have 1 patch by itself. That way you can fill up the whole side, and it's not an issue. The Gemara asks on Rav, what are you afraid of? Let's say they even fill up the entire row. What's the problem? We have a halacha that if you have 2 fields near each other and 1 corner of 1 field sticks into the other field, it's not a problem because it's clearly visible as 2 separate fields. So here the patches are different patches. What's the issue? So the Gemara answers the din of the 1 field could stick into another field only applies to fields, either 2 fields or a field and a patch, because those are identifiable as different. But a patch and a patch, those are too small to be considered separate, and therefore that halacha doesn't apply, and they have to be kept 3 tefachim apart. Okay, now Shmuel disagrees. Shmuel says you're allowed to plant a bunch of different patches near each other. The Gemara asks, well, what do you mean the leaves are going to get in each other's way? The Gemara says, so what you'll do is that you'll only plant part of each side of the square, and the sides of the square that are adjacent to each other, meaning the 2 different squares, the adjacent sides of 2 neighboring squares, you'll plant half of each side, and you'll keep the sides far away from each other. You'll start from opposite ends. Okay. Now the Gemara says, what happens if you plant a 3rd row right down the middle of the patch? You didn't just plant 1 vegetable in the center spot. You planted a row in the center, and that row was wider than a thin line. It was a whole tefach wide. So now you don't have 2 tefachim, you don't have 3 tefachim between the center row and the rows running parallel to it on the sides. Now, the rows are perpendicular to it is not a problem because perpendicular is anyway not a problem, right? We said that perpendicular rows can be right up near each other. But now you don't have 3 tefachim between the parallel rows. Is that a problem? So this question was asked by Ula. Rav Shesha said it's asur because you don't have 3 tefachim between the parallel rows. Rav Ashi said it's mutter. So Ravina asked, Rav Ashi, how could you say that? It's not 3 tefachim apart. Now we have a Mishnah that says clearly that would be asur. The Mishnah says as follows: if you plant cucumbers, pumpkins, and Egyptian beans, and you plant 2 rows of each, so that's okay because each set of 2 rows is considered to be a whole field, and therefore it's not considered like it's all combined into one big field. If, however, you plant only 1 row of each, so that's one mushed up field. So that you can't do. So how could you tell me that you're allowed to plant 3 rows near each other without 3 tefachim between them? So the Gemara says, Rav Ashi will tell you that that's different. It's different because cucumbers, pumpkins, and beans have long vines, and they spread out, and they get intertwined with each other. That's why that's asur. But other types of vegetables is mutter. Okay. Now the Gemara says actually the dot in the middle doesn't have to be just one plant. You can actually maximize your space by filling up the entire center as long as it's in the shape of a circle. Rav Kahana says, the name of Rav Yochanan, you can maximize your space if you have rows, if you have a frame 1/2 tefach wide going all around the 6x6 patch. Remember, the patch was 6 tefachim by 6 tefachim. So what you're going to do is you're going to plant a frame around the edges that's 1/2 tefach wide, and now you're left with a 5x5 tefach area in the center. You can plant that entire area in a circle, meaning you'll miss out the corners, but that circle can be filled up because since it's a circle, it's clearly a different piece of land. It's a different usage than the rows that are near it, and it's like it's perpendicular. Just like 2 perpendicular rows are not kilayim, a circle next to a straight line is not kilayim, and therefore that would be most of that's how you could fill the spaces. And versus, what do you mean fill the spaces? You can't fill all the spaces. You have to leave the corners. You can't plant the corners because then you won't have perpendicular. The last one on one side will be next to the one on the other side. That's not perpendicular. So the Gemara says, okay, so the corners you have to leave empty. So now the Gemara says, what about the spaces between the circle and the corner of the patch? The Gemara says you have to leave that empty also. The Gemara has another pshat over here. You know what the truth is? That you're allowed to plant the ends as long as the Gemara asks, hold on a second, how can you do this? The Gemara is understanding that you're allowed to put a lot of patches near each other. The Gemara says, what do you mean? You have to leave space between the patches. The neighboring patches will be in each other's way. The Gemara says, no, what you do is you plant the frames in different directions, meaning the frame is not just one row. The frame is a bunch of plants. It's a 1/2 tefach wide. So in one patch you plant the vertical rows, and in the neighboring patch you plant horizontal rows. That way they're perpendicular to each other, and it's not a problem of kilayim. Now the Gemara says, hold on a second. You're telling me that a circular patch counts as a patch, and therefore it's not kilayim with a nearby patch. But it's not true, because we have a brisa that says that a patch has to be a square. So that clearly a circle doesn't have the halacha of a separate patch for hilchos kilayim. So the Gemara says that's referring to a different halacha. That's referring to the halacha that you're allowed to have one piece of a field sticking into another field. And that's not considered to be kilayim because you can clearly see that they're different fields. One's from one field, one's from the other field. For that, you can't have a circular field. But as far as this halacha of neighboring fields, it's not a problem. And you're allowed to have a circular field, and it's allowed to be near another, and it's clearly defined as separate and not an iser of kilayim. That will take us to the Mishnah, and we'll end Daf Pehei.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.